right, yeah, true.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Lang. I'm one of the organizers for the Ansible NYC Meetup group. Tonight we have Timothy Appnel. Do I say that right? Appnel or?
You said it right. You can
Okay.
call me Tim.
Okay, or Tim from Red Hat / Ansible. He'll be kind of giving a presentation about Ansible 2.0 and all the cool new stuff that we'll have. So thanks again for everybody. Like we kind of had to change locations last minute. I want to give a big thanks to Yodle because they've offered us this great space and soda and beer, and so we really appreciate it. I'm going to let them give a quick spiel because they're the hosts and they've earned that. So and then up next will be Tim, and it's going to be about 45-minute presentation. We'll have some questions afterwards. Tim, how do you feel about questions during the presentation? Would you like to kind of wait till the end, or?
Yeah, ask away, and if I have a slide coming up, I'll just say that.
Okay, but also keep in mind, right? Like we can talk a lot afterwards too. So if you want to get into something very specific or have very technical questions, let's discuss at the end. So all right, well, thanks again everybody for coming out. I'm gonna hand it over to Daniel real quick, and thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Yodle. So I just wanted to say a few words about Yodle, and as Daniel said, I'll try to be brief. Daniel Rolnick, the CTO. Yodle is a software as a service for small businesses where we help them grow their customer relationships and acquire new customers in a profitable way. We have about 100 software engineers here at Yodle building that platform, and we follow a very rich DevOps culture with a continuous delivery platform that allows our engineers to move software to our customers at the speed of as fast as they can write it. And so that requires quite a bit of automation and systems engineering. And so we're always interested in hearing what other people are doing and how the products have evolved. And if you're interested in talking about that or talking to us about how we do it, you should check out our tech blog where we've posted our own talks that we've held, as well as other talks that we've posted here. So if you're interested, find anybody with a blue shirt and talk to us. We're always hiring. And thanks to Ansible for coming to talk. So Tim, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Daniel, and also Connie and Dan for putting all this together.
Just so since you're a little taller than everyone else.
Imagine that. Is this better? Is everyone? All right. I don't have a monitor speaker up here to know how I sound. So thanks for coming out, and also, like I said, thanks to Dan, Connie, putting us together, also the Yodle folks. So as they said, I'm from Ansible, Tim Appnel. I'm in the professional services group, so I work with a lot of customers, go out there, do training, help people through different things and that. So I'm going to be talking about what are the new things that came out in 2.0 and also some about what you can expect to see in 2.1. It's not just going to be going through the features. We have some edge cases, things about what might break on you if you haven't tried it out, things that are being deprecated or are deprecated. So let me ask before I go forward, who's tried out 2.0 or are actively using it now? Okay, so that's third. Okay, good to know. So for all of you that are Ansible users but haven't gone to 2.0, this I hope will make your life a lot easier, knowing what's coming up, what you can do better, and also what you might run into as you make that leap. So before I do that, I wanted to point out, do a little public service announcement here. I don't know if everyone saw that this drown attack. We released the playbook today to help everyone patch their servers from the drown attack. So this is on the Ansible blog, and it's right now the first entry. So don't worry about scribbling down a URL here. Just a public service announcement. If you're in that position, we kind of wrote you a playbook to help patch this, or at least give you a head start on it. So just a little sidebar. Wasn't expecting to do that today, but it came up. All right, so back to it. Oop. All right, so why 2.0? So it's been a long time coming, and for all you who followed it, I think it took us nearly a year to get 2.0 out. And what it is really a head-to-toe rewrite of whole sections of Ansible, the underlying Ansible engine. What was behind is that there's been over 3 years of organic growth. All type of code has been bolted on. New features bolted on over time as use cases came up, new use cases, other use cases shifted, things of that nature. And it was becoming really difficult to fix bugs over time and to test the code in an automated way, sending it out because of the way that this code had come together so organically. And I think also more importantly, we were getting feature requests that we wanted to do, and it was just almost impossible with the existing code base without some type of heavy refactoring and redoing of the internals of Ansible. So the team set about doing it, and actually it only took them a couple months to do that initial pass. What's taken so long is that once that first pass got done and it got out there, is we found all sorts of edge cases that people were out there using Ansible for, and things in their playbooks and in their roles and even some in their modules that they didn't realize were even possible in some cases, because so much of the code was done in a piecemeal and distributed way throughout the code. So a lot of time was spent by our engineers trying to address as many of those cases as possible, identify them, fix them, and then also not ruin the work that they had done in trying to do this type of refactoring and reorganization. So we'll get more into that. So let's just dive into the new features. This one's my personal favorite, and the one that I think really is going to change the way that you write playbooks, and it's the introduction of what we call blocks. And there's 3 significant usages for what these blocks are in your playbook. The one is the grouping of related tasks. So this is going to cut down on the verbosity and the repetitiveness of the way you write tasks inside of your playbook. Another is, so besides the grouping, you have also the ability to have these things inherited. So settings like when and become and things like that that you may have to repeat time and time again, you can now put in the same block, and they would apply to all the tasks inside of a block. And then the third one, and this is actually I think what drove blocks more than anything, was the ability to do sort of like try-catch behavior, the ability to catch an error and to recover from it or handle a problem in your playbook. That had been difficult, to say the least, to do, and more manual than we had liked it to be, and just suboptimal. So hopefully I can show you how that's going to be easier. So here's an example of a block. Let's see, you can probably see my pointer here. So the main thing is that you have a directive called of all things block, and we indent it a little bit more, and then we can do a series of tasks in that. So what happens is that these 3 tasks that you're seeing there all are having this when clause and the tags package applied to them. In the past, you would have had to put that when clause and the tags on each and every one of those tasks that you see there inside of the block. So this is what we mean by the grouping and the ability to kind of cut down on the verbosity and the repetitiveness of your playbooks. One thing I should also note about blocks is that they can be nested. Now you can probably take this too far, so I suggest you exercise a certain amount of caution and restraint when using these. But in this example here, we're just showing where we have a block inside a block where we had, one conditional that then applied to another. In this case, it is a simple example. You probably wouldn't bother with this the way I've done it, because it's only a single task with a when on it. But you could imagine if you did have a routine of several tasks for Debian and several tasks for Red Hat, where OS is there, you would then you could then really benefit from not having to repeat that when over and over and over again throughout your playbook. Or the common pattern is that people will rip out the whole Debian section and the Red Hat section and put it in separate files and do an include with some sort of conditional, which I have in a slide coming up. One other neat thing that, quite frankly, kind of happened out of by accident inside of blocks is that we introduced a new level of scoping. Ansible has purposefully tried to keep namespacing to a minimum and keep it simple. In our overriding, theme of trying to keep things simple, keep things straightforward, we only had really 3 levels of host, play, and global. What blocks has allowed us to do is that you can set a variable inside of a block, and that then when you leave the block, that goes out of scope. So this example here I have on the left, we see where we set a variable. I'm pointing, and obviously you can't exactly see where I'm pointing. All right, there we go. We set a variable at the play level, and we output that. But then also we set one at the inside the block for Lola. And what happens then is when we try to output that one, we get a variables not defined. So little thing to keep in mind that could come in handy. Some people I know that some of my clients have tried to use, have tried to do some form of variable scoping and ran into a certain amount of frustration that they couldn't kind of contain stuff. This gives them now a way of doing that inside of blocks. This was a result, and when I said this was a bit of a happy accident, this was a result of the rewriting of the entire playbook engine inside of it and the way that it worked, and that this type of scope was now all of a sudden possible. Another thing is also the way that we handle variables, which I have coming up in a slide in 1 second. So the last thing about blocks, and this is, like I said, the one that I think most people asked us for the most, that we went ahead and implemented. This is the idea of, like I said, it's not really a try-catch per se, but it's the ability to do a recover from errors. So in this case here, we have a block where we're doing a debug, but then we're running a command that causes a failure to happen. What happens at that point are all the tasks inside, it goes to the rescue section and we'll run those tasks. So in this case, another debug, we'll do a second failure. If it's Debian, it's going to fail. So and if it's Red Hat, of all places, it will then fall through to the third task before exiting the block. We also feature an always. So if you want to make sure something always runs, whether you had a block that ran successfully or if it failed, had an error, and you needed to go into a rescue, the always section will always run. So the idea here is that it gives you a way to do more automated recovery and rollback when you have a problem. In the past, you had to do, and I should have put an example up here for if anyone that's had to experience this pain, you would have to capture a variable when you ran a task and then store, or you would have to register a variable. You would then have to store that and say ignore errors, and then in a later task evaluate what went into that variable and see if it failed, and then take corrective action. And then if you had to take multiple steps in that corrective action, you had to repeat that same when clause over and over and over again each time you had to take a step. This makes this a lot more concise and a lot more, we believe, straightforward to implement that type of automated recovery from problems. All right. This is a new thing that they put in there for me. That this, I believe, is a new. As you see, it's in a maintenance release, which is due out any day now. It's this any errors fatal. So the idea here is that if you do have any errors, it then will cause it to drop out of this block. Meaning, if you do a rescue, it'll take the corrective action, but it won't stop the playbook from running. In this case, it turns on something that it will exit out of that after it handles the problem, the error that you have. All right, so some more new features. So that was fit for blocks. Blocks is like a very big thing. I really already feel myself changing the way I write my playbooks and write my roles because of it, and I really think it's a good idea and something really useful. So some other things that have gone into version 2 is improved error messaging. Because we've rewritten the entire playbook parser and the way that it handles, we're able now to capture errors in a better, more concise way, more I should say more specific way, and to provide more information to where something went wrong and maybe why something went wrong. And this is an example. This is my most common mistake I personally make, which is forgetting to quote variables that start a value. That's one I always forget about myself here. So you see that it's a lot more than just a simple, syntax error here somewhere sort of thing that you would have seen in 1.9 and prior versions. The core engineering team put a lot of time and effort into trying, like, not only capturing these, but then to emit helpful information that helps you figure out, well, what did I do wrong without having to go to the docs even. I was just talking to Dan earlier. I think we might have missed some of that because he has one that they just kind of said deprecated and didn't give you something helpful. I would consider that a bug, and if you run into those, we would like to hear from it. Not we probably would. We would like to hear from it, and send us a pull request. So we think this is going to make developers' lives a lot easier, knowing what is going wrong. All right. So this is another pretty significant thing that came out of refactoring. We've introduced these things called a strategy. And this is something that is actually pluggable. We're shipping with 2 plugins right now. We hope that the community comes up with other ways. This is how Ansible processes its tasks. Traditionally, what we've seen is what we call the linear. So that's always been, assuming you're not using the serial directive, every host goes through the first task, and then you move on to the second task, and every host goes through that one in the host loop. The problem that some people have run into is when you're dealing with a large infrastructure and you have, maybe you have 100 servers and 5 of them are new, or 5 of them need to be updated, or 5 of them are really out of line. Then the first 95 maybe fly through their yum command, and then the other 5 sit there loading all these packages, and in the meanwhile, the other 95 are sitting there just kind of waiting. So in some cases, well, obviously the people found that frustrating. So there are cases where you want it to speed ahead. So that's what this free strategy is. So essentially what free does is tries to run as fast as possible by letting fast-moving hosts or hosts that don't need to do something move forward in the loop. Now, that's subject to having enough forks. If you have 1,000 servers and you only have 10 forks, you're not going to run nearly as fast as you probably want to. But at least fast would allow those 5 that I used in my hypothetical to keep working while the other 95 can move on to the second task, the third task, fourth task, and keep speeding ahead and completing. So like I said, we're very interested to see what other ideas and other execution strategies the community needs and wants and comes up with. And this is something that's a new plugin in 2.0 that you can write your own strategies for. The way you use them is pretty simple. You just add at the play level this strategy directive, and you give it the name of the strategy you want to run. In this case, we're saying we want this to run in free. And actually, you can run this thing. Assuming that you have a mixed inventory of like Debian and Red Hat family hosts, you could run this and see how it executes differently. You could also put strategy linear, but that's sort of unnecessary. But if it helps you, you can. But like I said, by default, we're going to run linear, which is the standard way that Ansible 1.9 ran. So yeah, that's about it for execution strategy. Yeah, you've always, the forks has always been either at the command line or in your configuration file. You've always been able to set the number of forks that you run. Yeah. So by default, we do 5, just to be very conservative. But I've run 50 on this machine. And we have one client that runs. They have a machine that allows them to run 750 forks, and it goes. Not a problem. So, yeah. So another long-standing request, or maybe I'd say a source of frustration that we heard from our user base out there that had been difficult to address until we did this rewrite and this refactoring of the underlying engine, was the ability to do execution time evaluation of includes. What we would see is, we would see something like this in 1.9 playbooks. People wanting to do an include and pass in some sort of variable or data structure that they were looping over in the include. And if you put this up in 1.9, you'll get an error. This does not work for you, because include statements were treated as preprocessor statements. So the parser would run through the playbook, go to each include, grab it, and insert it at that point in building its entire parse tree. And then it would go back to the beginning after it had done all of its pre-processing and then start to run. So the problem became, well, if you have something dynamic that's being set by a variable, how do we know what to load? So we couldn't, because of the way that our include mechanism worked as a preprocessor. Again, part of 2.0, rewriting everything pretty much from the ground up. They've now made it that this is now possible. Another thing that's possible, which made me personally very happy. I personally wasn't a fan of looping over includes. Some people were and were very vocal about it. This is one that used to sort of drive me a little batty. As you see in this top half here, this is what all you've had to do in 1.9, which is if you had a mixed OS environment, you would probably break things out in the YAML file. Actually, I was just talking about this earlier, and then put a when clause on each one. Now in 2.0, because we do execution time evaluation, we're able to replace those 4 lines up there with this 1 below. I've seen, I was hoping he'd come, Brian Coca, one of our core engineers, had an example of this, that it was like 12 lines that he was able to collapse into 2. And he was even doing it where he had a fallback on a default, where it's like, well, if you come up against an OS family that you don't know, here's a default one you should load. Yeah, so he did in 3 lines. Anyway, but this I think is really handy, and this is another way that this type of execution time evaluation is going to make writing playbooks faster, easier, more concise. How am I doing on time? I just realized I don't have a clock on my screen to. Okay, perfect. Yeah, just found my phone too. All right, so this is one that you could say it's more of a bug fix than than it is a new feature. But one of the biggest sources of frustration that we found working with our users in areas where users were getting confused and having to do a lot of workarounds and things was in the way that we were handling and managing variables inside of Ansible. I don't know if any of you have gone up against this, where you can't figure out what's going to take precedence over another thing, or things, you're getting values coming out you wouldn't expect. And the problem is given the organic growth of the way that Ansible came about, variable management was happening all over the code. Throughout the code, there was no centralized place for this to happen. And then it became a matter of, well, what loads first would determine how things how things came together. And that just was not, that was suboptimal, and we did not feel acceptable. So they went ahead and ripped out every part of the variable management code and created a system that everything runs through inside of Ansible now. So it had a number of positive effects from that, and avoiding all this, piecemeal guesswork of what was going on. Okay, so just to recap what I mean, this was I pulled from our documentation the variable precedence in 1.9 or whatever. We only had 5 levels of it, and my favorite is number 2, which is where most people had some struggles and got a little lost, and understandably so, which was we had a whole list of things, and it was essentially called "and everything else." So the number 1 was what you gave it on the command line wins. And then depending on how things loaded and in what order you put things in your playbook and a little other black magic, they all came together, and then it went out to the inventory and looked at facts and then any defaults you had in your role. And so that number 2 particularly was a bit of a frustrating thing for people to understand and master and work around. So what happened in 2.0, because of the refactoring, because of variable management is running through one system, and we avoid flattening those data structures so early, and we wait to the very last second before we do evaluation of any variables. We now have 16 levels of precedence. It's very well defined. You may wince and say, oh my God, 16. But I would point out that we really haven't added anything here that wasn't already there. Some of the blocks stuff is new in 2.0. But what's more important to note is that there's only one thing alone in each level of that precedence. So now you can sit there and figure out that if I put in a play variable, I know that is going to supersede a registered variable. Without a doubt, that's what's going to happen. 1.9, that was a bit of guesswork, a little black magic going on there. So this is I think a really big improvement. It also is an area you might run into some problems as you go from 1.9 to 2.0. I've helped a few clients already start porting their stuff over, and there were a number of things that worked fine for them, and not so much in 2.0. My favorite was setting a variable named region with a variable named region. I had a client do, and it worked for them in 1.9 by some small miracle, but in 2.0 they got a recursive loop error because now we're actually using recursion and things like that, sane, good programming happening in there. So needless to say, they shouldn't have been doing that, but they were getting away with it, but not anymore. All right, so a bunch of other things that are in there. Because it took us so long to get 2.0 out, we had quite a backlog of new modules and improved modules that we released over 200 when 2.0 came out that weren't in 1.9 before that. A lot more EC2, stuff in VMware, stuff in OpenStack, a lot of others. There's quite a list. If you go into the changelog, you can see the full and complete list of that. There's also dozens of new inventory scripts out there, some new callbacks, some new lookups, filters, things like that. Inventory was quite a big leap that at this point we're into, I think, pretty much every cloud management tool, both public and private, out there. Gone into things like Console, Surf, Zookeeper. There's a whole bunch of new inventory plugins now there, so hopefully that'll help. And like I said, as I said, I could have you here for 3 or 4 hours going over the full changelog for 2.0. I won't, But if you're interested in the full list, or you need to reference any of this, I recommend the changelog in the main Ansible repository has that entire list. I've already kind of covered this, so I'll just point out that if you've looked at the 1.9 code and you hop to 2.0, you'll see it's structured very differently underneath the hood. This should not impact anyone from an end user standpoint. This was just mostly an internal thing, and I know the team took great pains to keep that as isolated from end users as possible. But there's a lot more of, instead of these super methods and things that weren't exactly good classes or OO, there's a lot more, much better OO principles, classes that do one thing, the use of base classes to avoid repetitive things of that nature. And the key part too for doing all that was just the ability to do better unit tests and more precise unit tests, so we could roll out better releases faster than what we were having to deal with. A couple other small noteworthy things I just thought I would bring up is we've added a new meta directive, refresh inventory. So what this allows you to do is if you do something like spin up a bunch of new instances, if you start off, let's say, an AWS job, and you are using the AWS dynamic inventory plugin, and then you add a few new instances, well, the problem you had was that you had to figure out a way to refresh your inventory because now you didn't have those new instances in there. We've now added this directive that you can say, go out, throw out the inventory I have and go pull it again from whatever source of truth you've configured. Before, what people had to do is they had to create two plays that targeted the same inventory. So they would say, all right, I just spun up a bunch of new instances, now I'm going to pretend to do a new play, and that would cause it to pull down the inventory again. Now you can just drop in that meta refresh inventory. And the other thing, and this is a bit of a, for some people it was a bit of an issue, is when they were dealing with delegates, the delegate returned facts about the instance that they were working on, the facts would get associated to the delegate and not to the inventory host that was being worked on. So we've now put in a switch that you can allow for that to go to the right place. For now, the defaults have are left to in such a state that it emulates what was done in 1.9. So if this isn't an issue for you, don't worry about it. If it is, we now have given you a way to work around it. All right. So that was it for the main new features. So let me cover what's going to break, what could possibly break on you. So like I said, we spent, the big holdup in 2.0 was really when we put it out there in the wild and people started using it and they were coming back with all these edge cases, and then we were going, we would evaluate and say, okay, is this, how do we fix this and not ruin everything we've done here? So we intended for 100% backwards compatibility, but in the end, we feel like we got to like 98.5. And that was one of our core engineers. I asked him, I said, all right, so we didn't hit 100%, what did we get? And he came back, he said, 98.5. And I went, okay, I'm running with that. So there it is. And the main reason is that there was just some things in there that were possible in 1.9 that just were bad, broken, and shouldn't have worked in the first place. And after reviewing them, it was just did not make sense to introduce bugs back into code in order for everyone's playbook to run without disruption. So there are a small number of spots that you could possibly run into where you'll have a break going from 1.9 to 2.0. And I hope to cover these, at least cover the ones that we think that you'll see the most in there. So the biggest area that we've seen the problems for some people is with the new variable precedence being so precise and correct, is people that, like, my client that I had that was setting region with another variable called region, those sorts of scenarios where that should have been an error. You should have got a recursive loop error, but for some reason the code was such that it let them get away with that, and now they had a break, so they had to fix that. So those are some of the areas that we were not able to continue with backwards compatibility. Some other areas was that we, over the evolution of Ansible and Ansible playbooks, we allowed for some idiomatic stuff that was really ugly, and I have an example up here that we evaluated and said, you know, we have to do too much guesswork here. You shouldn't really be doing this in the first place, and instead of guessing and guessing wrong, we're just going to say we can't support this. And this is a good example where you're doing an include, you're passing in a variable, but you've also put something on there called tags, but we don't know if tag's a parameter being passed in, or is that an actual task tag in Ansible? Because of where you put it and how, they kind of have to guess you must mean a task tag, but they're not sure. So this is the type of stuff that they said, you know, this is not something that we want to support going forward. You need to do this differently in a way that you know, it's more clear. So that's some of the things you might run into. There's a lot of things different with the way that they've done variable handling and typing inside of YAML. There's a whole section we have in our docs about how that's done differently and in a smarter way. In the past, we were essentially casting everything down to a string every time, and then if you changed the value or pulled it out, you'd have to cast it back if you wanted an integer or something different than a string. So that's also what about the retaining types is about in the templates. And if you got a little tricky with trailing trailing breaks and lines in YAML, that was a little wonky, and we've addressed that too. So again, these are all areas that we were very edge case. From everything we saw, there was just a small handful of people that had trouble with this, and hopefully you're not in that boat, but I'm putting up here in the event you run into this, you can go, okay, yeah, right. I remember hearing some about that. We have a full guide, by the way, that the engineers wrote, this porting guide that essentially lists every known wonky thing you might run into jumping from 1.9 to 2.0. A lot of edge case stuff. Again, I probably could be here for, I was going over the page today to make sure I captured all the main points. Probably could be here for a couple hours explaining all of them, and then you might use one of them. Because like I said, a lot of edge cases. Oop. Okay. So one area that also we see some potential issues arising, and I'm going to take a little bit more of a deep dive here for a couple slides, is now that we've made includes dynamic, and there was a lot of good reasons why people wanted that, and there were a lot of reasons that or things that solved. It did come with a little bit of a cost, that there are now a couple of things that you could possibly get caught up in and get run into some frustrating situations, and the engineers tried to work around this the best they can, but at the end they just felt like there's only so much we can do. So these are some of them. One of them is that we don't really know, with all these dynamic includes, we can't tell you exactly which tags are in a playbook until runtime. So anyone if you are doing any type of dynamic includes and you define a tag in an include, but not in the main playbook, when you use the list tags, that tag will not show up. So if I have something like I had in my previous example where I was pulling a file based on the OS family, and inside of that I have a tag called package, and that doesn't exist in my main playbook, and I said list tags, it wouldn't tell me I have a tag packages, because it has no way of evaluating that tag unless it actually runs, and therefore it can't find it to find that tag. Same thing happens with handlers. So the possibility is out there that you will miss these things when you're working with dynamic includes. Well, not that you'll miss these things, but Ansible will not report it to you, and you'll have to be aware of what you're doing to realize why that may not be there. And I said this is just the nature of evaluating things at execution time, because we don't know how it's going to execute. We don't know what we're going to find to go out and give you this type of feedback. Another problem that we've already seen people run into is essentially creating a loop inside a loop. So if you look here on the right, we have a playbook test where it's looping through an include and passing in a list of A, B, C. And inside of that include, we have another loop going 1, 2, 3. So what happens because of Ansible's flat namespacing is that the outer loop gets the item from the outer loop gets overwritten by the inner loop. So what would happen is without that set fact that I have there in red, you would get 1, 2, 3, like you see there in the first section. So what you need to do to work around this, if you're going to put a loop inside a loop in this case, is to set a fact with the outer loop's value in with a different name, and then go through your loop, and then you'll get the A1, B2. Oh, that's a typo. It should be C3. Does everyone follow that? Enough? Okay. Yes, right. Because you're inside of one loop from test, and it's setting item, and while it's inside that include, it's getting set again, and it's overriding it inside of the include. Before, without dynamic includes, that type of nested loop wasn't possible. But by making loops dynamic and being evaluated at execution time, you can now overwrite your loop. That's an unfortunate side effect of dynamic includes, though, inside of Ansible.
So what is the setback fix it?
Because it puts the value away in a different variable before it gets overridden. You can, when you go through the slides, you can try this out, and you'll see what I mean. But by setting the fact like that, like I said, you stash it before it gets overridden, so then you can use it later and still have it.
It must be stashed more than the list row.
Um,
What I don't get is that item is not related to this group directly in the playbook. It looks like a random addition or a side effect.
sorry. Oh wait. What is? Sorry.
So if you don't have the setback statement, where does this do?
Oh, you know what? That's a good point. I was trying to consolidate my example. So if I didn't have set fact, it should just be message, foo, and item without the set fact. You're right. All right. I see what you mean. Yes. Sorry about that. That is a typo.
So it's food that's being overwritten, not item.
Well, foo evaluates to item in the outer loop, because remember we're evaluating it at execution time. So assuming I have the setback removed and that message is just foo, it would look up foo and say, oh, that equals item, and then it would go get item. And then item would be 1, 2, 3 in this case. If you didn't have that there, because items being overridden and reused by the second loop. I can talk about this more for anyone that really needs to know more. Hopefully, my suggestion is don't use loops inside of loops. That's my personal suggestion on this one. Is it's just it was one of those things we we implemented, we rolled out there, and then someone did this right away and started complaining. And the team looked at ways to do this, fix this the best they can, and it just wasn't possible without getting really messy in there. And really, we kind of, recommend you try to avoid it, because you're adding complexity and debugging and whatnot to your playbooks that isn't advisable. And there's better ways to possibly handle situations like these. So, all right. So those were some of the main areas that you could possibly, or the most common of those breaks that we anticipate. As we said, we feel the vast majority are pretty much edge cases. They're not going to be common. We try to work through all those so that we've kept it to a minimum. I'm going to talk about a few deprecations to make you aware of. These work in 2.0. We're just recommending you get used to not, because sometime in the future this is going to go away. Also, in the spirit of more verbose and better messages, error messages, we also have more deprecation messages. So one thing that a number of people have commented on when they've taken their 1.9 playbooks and run them through 2.0 is that they get a lot of deprecation messages now. So a lot of the things that were kind of made things inefficient or messy, but we were able to address without really wrecking things. They've put these messages on. This is one that I think is most common, and I realized when I saw this first come out from our engineering team, I realized, I got a lot of cleanup to do, which is the using bare variables. If you go through our porting guide, there's probably 10 or 12 points that relate to and boil down to this one statement. And Brian Coca, who's one of our core engineers, keeps repeating, like, mustaches everywhere except in when clauses, essentially. So, I have an example there where you have with items foo, and the problem with that statement that the engineers had to grapple with is, what is that? Is foo a string? Is that a data structure? They had to guess. I think they guessed that it was a data structure, but they weren't. There were people that actually had a string, a single item in there, in their list. So, and there's many, many other examples of this sort of thing. At this point now, they're saying you need to put everything in the double curlies, the mustaches. And if you don't, you're going to get a deprecation message saying, hey, next time you want to put these in the curlies, and this is going to go away soon. So that's probably the one that I expect people to see the most. There's a couple others I thought worthwhile mentioning. We were just having a debate about this one earlier today, because that blog post that we have, the playbook we wrote, uses this old style here. But because these are all things that actually predate 2.0, start avoiding using su and sudo to do your privilege escalation. Instead, use the become mechanism. We now support other forms than just su and sudo, and so they're now running everything through this become mechanism. So instead of those two, we're encouraging people to stop using them and use the become. The same thing goes for in inventory variables. There's a mapping to that that happened. They all still work. I'm just pointing out the change. And then another thing that's was deprecated again back in, I think, 1.8 or 1.9 is that you no longer require SSH in things like SSH hostname. It can just be Ansible hostname. That's a reflection of the fact that we support many other connection types than just SSH now. WinRM is the most common one for all the Windows users, but there's a bunch of others. One of the new things that got added was a Docker connection type, for example. Now, instead of SSH, you can use this Docker connection type if you want. And there's a few other ones in there, and this is another pluggable thing. So we didn't want to muddy the waters and confuse things, so we got rid of that SSH in those variables. So again, encourage you in your work to try to remove that stuff, but it still works as it did before. This is another small thing that they changed because of having to guess, is this a variable or something else, is this top section here where you could specify a variable at the top level. You now have to create that extra vars thing to be more specific to what you're doing and what your intent is. Again, this stuff all works. It's just you're going to get a deprecation message, and at some point it will break on you. So this is another one that was never good form, and the core engineering team decided that they're going to actually do something about it by complaining at you, which was we were seeing people that would create a whole data structure. Here we just have a simple one that's debug params with one key value pair in it message, but we saw people that would build entire data structures in their variable section and then pass that whole data structure as one variable through to the module, and that was just an unsafe thing to do, because if someone changes something up top and you miss it down below, you might pass the wrong thing or something you don't expect to pass, and then you'll be sorry. So they've decided that they're not going to support those type of things, and because it's not safe. Instead, they want you to do something like that lower half there where you're more explicit in what you're passing. And explicit in your intent. This is, so for the most part, well, actually not for the most part, the plugin APIs are entirely compatible with, so if you've written your own plugins, modules, callbacks, it should not change on you. It should still work. There are some areas that things are a little bit different. For example, callbacks have a version 1 and a version 2 API that work differently, but if you use a version 1, it'll still work. We still encourage you to move to 2.0, but at least your 1.0 callbacks will still run as they did. The only thing that changed about callbacks is now you have to explicitly activate them. Before in 1.9, you just put them in your path and Ansible loaded it and ran it. Now in 2.0, you have to say, I want this callback to run. I want this to be executed. That's one small thing. But once you put it in your config, you're good to go there. Where you may run into trouble, and this we find is a very, very small amount of the Ansible community, is if you wrote some type of scripts plugging into the Ansible API, not the plugin API, but the actual like playbook parser and things like that, where you got really under the hood, you are probably in for a world of hurt going from 1.9 to 2.0 because they rewrote everything, and their goal with backwards compatibility was in playbooks and roles working the way that they used to, and the plugin API and the command line working like it used to. And all that stuff that lied below those was free game and got totally changed. And oh yeah, I already mentioned the callback, the small callback activation change. All right, so that was it for 2.0. Talk a little bit about 2.1. So possibly one of the biggest changes, and I didn't put it up here, is that we're going to get back to like releases every 3 months. Right now, version 2.1 is slated for April release, and things are well underway there right now. And we've made a number of announcements around what's going to be in 2.1. These are the main ones, which is continued Windows support. The big goal is to take the beta label off of it so that people can manage Windows machines from Ansible, and you can do it now, but we now have full-time staff that are just Windows developers that are now working on that part of the integration, and we're going to take that beta label off of it. It's long overdue, and we're going to do it. Another big thing, it was a big announcement last week or 2 weeks ago at Ansible Fest London, is now the automation of network infrastructure. So things by Arista and Juniper and Cisco and all those people, you can now manage and automate your load balancers, your switchers, and your routes with Ansible itself. Not the software kind, the physical infrastructure gear. So that was a lot of people excited, maybe not you and all of you in the room, but there are a lot of people, a lot of our customers have large network infrastructures to manage and have been dying for that type of automation. And we had some of that, but now we have a concerted effort and a full-time team just working on that stuff. So that link I have up there is to the article and the release of that announcement that was made a week or two ago if you're interested. So that's a big deal for us that you're going to be seeing, and also continued module expansion and enhancements. Some areas that of great interest right now that we're seeing is with Azure support is suboptimal. A lot of work is going into that now. We have full-time resources on that. Also improving Docker and getting support of Kubernetes into Ansible itself. So that there'll be modules that'll let you orchestrate and all that. Another thing that's already been committed, if you pull, and pull down from GitHub what's there, all the modules now can send back diff information, and Ansible can do something with that. So now when you use the diff flag on the command line, if a module can feed those type of things back to you. Probably take a little bit of time going out there and updating every module to use this, but the mechanism's in place and they're putting it into various core modules now. Right. Well, the idea with the diff flag was the ability to say, okay, something changed. I'm getting a change coming back, but what changed? I don't know. Now the module can feed back whatever makes sense for what that module is doing. This is what changed. Like these properties changed, or this file got updated, that sort of thing. Yes? I suppose it could be used together with that, yes. I mean, it's the idea is to give you feedback to what changed, but this can run without the check mode. That just you want to know what changed while it was running. I haven't tried to combine the two because this really just got committed the other day. There's a lot of talk about it at Ansible Fest as it was going in and all and what it was, but yeah.
I just asked because checkmate is kind of useless for some
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that one, or where you have a task that's dependent on another task running, and since it's in check mode, that task never ran actually, and therefore you get a failure. Yeah, I know what you mean. The check only gets you so far. Just wondering here in my head if the whole block rescue would now help you at least handle check errors. That is an area we still we could use to improve, but I know what you mean. Like the idea of diff is to give you more information to what's happening inside the modules, and the modules didn't have a really good way of feeding that back. Now that they have this, and then because it's a switch, you can not see it if you don't want to, or see it if you do. So. This is another thing that we've talked about. I hope happens, still hoping happens, because this one bothers me personally, is the core modules repo getting folded back into the core repo and the extras going off and being its own package. The reason being is like when I go in there and I have my downtime and I try to help out and look at some pull requests and bug reports, it's kind of messy in there because of everything's packed into one or two repos, so and broken up in such a way that it's sometimes hard to follow what changes need to happen and where. So this is something that they've talked about doing now, is reorganizing how we're doing all this stuff. I hesitate only because it's what, 2 months away tops, and I haven't seen it start moving yet, so I'm starting to get a little worried that it may drop back into another version. But I know it's been a long-standing issue for us, and I think the community, to organize the code better, at least in at the repo level now that we've reorganized the actual code itself pretty well. And so that's the main thing. And so we're already, like I said, already started this now. If you pull what's in the GitHub and master, you're already getting some of these, and watch the change log that's in there. You're seeing this stuff already crop up. I can take questions. One other administrative note I want to make is we are also hiring. If you're interested, I'm really getting tired myself. We're really shorthanded in the professional services space and also in the sales engineering space. So yourself, or if you have any friends out west, I could use a few less cross-country flights myself. We're really, really shorthanded on the West Coast, like we don't have anyone anymore. I work remotely, but all of us that are in my group are here on the East Coast. So every time we get a call for the West Coast, one of us is flying cross-country these days. So you're volunteering? You're applying? All right. Yes. Yeah.
And it will capitalize the T, but then the application doesn't like that capital T, and I have to do a bunch of stuff in Jinja 2 to get around that. Is that
Well,
is that in the porting guide, like how I should actually do that?
I believe that is in the porting guide, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head the exact fix for that. I think that's the one, if you put that true in quotes, it'll treat it as a string and not convert it to a Boolean. That's the trick, though, is you can't just put true. You have to put true in quotes. I think that's the trick. The other thing is some of that new handling can be that we have a feature switch to turn it off. That if it's like really going to break your stuff, you can revert back to the old way, and they'll do that. But that's one, I think, where they pushed the envelope and said, we're going to change the way this does it. Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic inventory? Since I think Brian last week was talking about how it used to be a second citizen kind of goes somewhere, pull down precedence.hi, and now it's actually part of the core Ansible library. But I kind of want to know how is it being used? You know.
Yeah. So the question is, how is inventory now a first-class citizen rather than a second? Yeah, right, the dynamic ones. That had more to do with where the code lived than it does how they're being run and how they're being executed. Because before, it was this extras subdirectory off on the side, and you had to copy that over and then run it. Now it's actually under lib, and you can. It's there. Yeah, that's what he meant by it. You know, Brian spends all day in that repo, so to him that's a really big deal.
For me, I put it in /etc/Ansible/host.
Yeah, you still need to move it into place or symlink it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one area that they did not do a whole lot of renovating, and I would not be surprised if I'm totally off the record here or unofficial because I'm not in the core engineering team, would not be surprised if we see some more refactoring in that area. They spent a lot of the time inside of the playbook internals and the variable management internals, but they didn't really touch the inventory part too much. But
It used to be that I'll have dynamic inventory in one place, and then it'll somehow combine magically with this other inventory that I have that is flat inventory, that kind of, and then somehow you merge together and I specify -I. So kind of want to know if, say, do I have to symlink it anymore, or do I include it somewhere else, or it's just automatically figuring it out, right?
yeah, it was just more of when you installed it, it wasn't there unless you moved it. Now it's part of the package and in the lib. That's the main. That was what he meant. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So we've had the example where like you spin up 50,000 threads to do your Ansible push.
was 750, but yes. It's 50,000 nodes they were managing, but 750 threads, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's for Ansible.
Or forks.
I was wondering if, since you see a lot of, production Ansible environments, if you could talk about the relative prevalence of push versus pull model. Do you see any Ansible pull model around?
The only way I see pull being used in our clients is when they're using Ansible to manage Puppet and Chef, which is actually I wouldn't say prevalent. Well, there's a significant minority of people that use Ansible to manage Chef and Puppet, to the point where we didn't do this, but someone in the community, independent of Ansible and Red Hat, submitted a Puppet and a Chef module that went into 2.0. So if you go in there, there are modules for managing Chef and Puppet that came from someone else. We weren't trying to start a feud, but the pull request was there and out in the open, so it was like, all right, and people were +1ing it, so we were like, all right, code looks good, we'll commit it. So, yeah.
We use, like in my work, we use pull a lot. So our pipeline is, so we actually build an AMI for every release of our application, right? So it's a Node.js app, and we have a ton of dependencies, and it can take like 10 minutes to build this stupid VM. And with an auto-scaling group, that sucks. So
Yeah.
for every release, we do a build. And the way that we do that is, we build an AMI, and we install Ansible via pip, and then we just check out a repository that then runs through all of the Ansible stuff that needs to do, removes all of its presence, and then we package that up as an AMI. We'll leave Ansible laying around. And I've seen a number of use cases like that. I think you'll probably see something similar like for Kubernetes type environments where you have this Docker thing and you want to do a couple of things, but you don't need to know about the rest of the environment, or you can find out all of these facts in your discovery service rather than
Yep.
on your Ansible host. So those are the use cases I've seen, and they've been pretty successful. But
Yeah.
you do approach your problems a little bit differently. So like in our use case, we put a lot of our metadata in our tags, and then we use our tags as sort of that discovery service, or like where we want to know about stuff, like what environment am I in, and those are things you would normally put in your inventory file and use to
Right.
right. So
Right.
We run pull consistently. So.
yeah.
Yeah.
Scalability wise, I don't know how much it would be different.
We.
I found with 2.0 so far, my unofficial tests have been that it's significantly faster in execution than 1.9, and a lot of those sort of like, I've only got 5 or 10 threads, those bottlenecks seem to just go away because it's so much faster and I don't notice as much.
It generally 2.0 is faster. In some areas they found it was a little bit slower because of what they were doing, but they worked, again, really hard to find all those things and flatten them out there. You're also going into your question, you're going into areas that Tower, our commercial product, handles. It does have the ability to handle auto-scaling events and then run an Ansible playbook on that. And we also announced something, we showed something at Ansible Fest London of this, they're calling, it's part of 3.0 called Ramparts. And the idea being that Tower will dispatch these slaves out to different data centers and all, and they'll run independently, and the controller will pull that information back. And that's working with somewhat of a pull model from what I've seen, but it's been very early on. Yeah, and I don't have those slides because they were just, our chief architect was showing them for the first time 2 weeks ago at there. So, yeah. Yes.
So in terms of, you laid out some of the potential options with the playbook school model to Go. Is there any way to flush any of those out? Like, will syntax check catch any or some of these, or do you think they're rare that we don't need that?
No, they've done a pretty good job of detecting them and then giving you an error that says, hey, this doesn't work now, do it this way. So I had up on the screen like a very common error that's just straight up syntax problem. But I haven't actually torture tested 2.0 to try to run some of this stuff through it. But from what I've seen is that there's usually It's usually like 4 or 5 lines explaining what you did wrong and how you want to do it differently. With these being known too, I'm pretty sure that they're covered. Whoop. What just happened? Ah. Okay. All right, there we go. Just, yes. Yeah, yeah. All right, so the question was about support, and right now there haven't been any real changes with that. What I have seen is that sometimes people buy tower licenses and don't install it, and they only run core. There are some things in the works, but nothing's been announced yet. And it's only been a few months, and a few of those months were over the holidays, so we haven't been completely integrated yet into the Red Hat machine. For instance, one of the things that you'll be seeing very soon is Red Hat education and certification training will be taking over Ansible training. So you'll be seeing Red Hat certifications and things like that coming out around Ansible. Support's one area I don't have a lot of visibility in. I just know stuff's in the works, but for now it hasn't changed. Yeah. So sorry, we'll go here then. Yes. Yes. So the question is about open sourcing Tower. I have nothing official and nothing definite. I can just point to Red Hat has a very well-established history, and I would expect that to be the same for Ansible and Ansible Tower. Look at Manage IQ and CloudForms, which was a commercial product and was acquired by Red Hat, and about 2 years later, it became an open source tool, an open source software. Sorry, we just have one there, and then I'll get, yes.
Questions about Red Hat also. So with Red Hat parent now, can we expect to see more Red Hat support in Galaxy, playbooks in Galaxy? Can we expect to see something like DevOps, Red Hat, any of that stuff being worked on internally?
There's a lot being worked on internally. I have nothing specific. I can just it's definitely happening. I can also assure you that we will not become a Red Hat only tool. The upper management has said it, everyone has repeated it, and I always point to 2 weeks after we were acquired, and Red Hat signed a really big partnership with Microsoft. That we're not going to become a Red Hat only tool. Debian support will be there. We're actually looking at trying to officially support some other forms of Linux, possibly, that we're being asked for. So there's that part. And then other tools, I would. One of the most tricky parts being with Ansible before being acquired by Red Hat is they love us so much they're almost smothering us to death right now. There was only 55 of us at the time of the acquisition, and we're talking, this is from the accountants and the HR people all the way through engineering, 55. I think they had someone figured out that they have like 200 sales reps for every one of ours. It's been, and then all the engineering teams that were using Puppet against their will have wanted all of our time, that it's really drinking from a fire hose right now. So I would expect to see change, but I honestly have nothing official to announce. I just expect that you're going to be seeing a lot more of us in Red Hat tools beyond Ansible itself. So, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I promised I'd go to, yes. Yes. Nothing official, but I would not be surprised, because now Puppet's a competitor of Red Hat essentially, in a sense that something would not change, but I don't know the specifics of that. when that might happen, if that would happen, you know, I would, if I were a betting man, I would bet it will happen eventually. I just don't know when, and there's been no announcement to that side. I actually feel like that might be one of the last products to actually adopt Ansible. I've been already seeing stuff coming out through the OpenShift group. They already have a whole, I think it's OpenShift-Ansible up in GitHub of playbooks, and they have another thing called Atomic Apps underways that I know is using Ansible. But I expect to see a lot more, but I'm not sure specifically when. So, yes. That's a good question. I don't know. You'd have to ping me, and I could get an exact answer for you on that. The Windows engineer was in my group. So it was bad enough there were only 4 of us to do professional services. It was then we got acquired, and Windows became a big deal, and he was our part-time Windows developer. He went away, that we're down to 3 people now doing all the professional services under Red Hat. So I know the guy and can get a direct answer on that one from it. I think Matt, I would bet money Matt knows about and has a plan for it. It was just a matter of time and resources to addressing these things, which we now have the resources being plugged into Red Hat. So, yes. I know that's a very good question. Yeah, I know we were taking a big risk because 2 or 3 of us were in the same room together in London for a day. That would have been pretty tragic. Yeah, we actually all have to work independently. That rarely do I actually see my colleagues at a client. I just hear them on the phone, and occasionally, like when we get together for like Ansible Fest, we'll see one or the other. So, yeah. So, all right. Yeah. Sure, the best I can. I mean, generally what we have a guy, Peter Sporiega, did I say his last name right? He used to work for Arista, and we recruited him away some months ago. And he has gone to all the major he's worked for other network people before he was at Arista, before he came to us. He's gone out to work with all those vendors and convince them the need and the nobility and supporting this type of an automation effort, and gotten them on board and gotten them to contribute code, which lets you from a module tap into these different pieces of gear and make settings, make configuration settings, tell it to start, stop, and things of that nature. So he's working on keeping that consistent across all of them, because before it was happening organically and was sort of all over the board, and he's trying to make it more predictable, actually consistent and predictable across all these different pieces of network gear. He's had a tough task because some of them have REST APIs, some of them support SSH, some of them don't, some of them have all these other things, and he's been trying to navigate those things. But the whole idea is that we will give end users a set of modules that they don't have to really think about that stuff. We figure it out for them. So that's about the most I have. I think.
Do you know which vendors are on board?
Yeah, they put it the big 5. I'm not a network infrastructure guy. I know it's Cisco, Arista, Cumulus, Juniper, and there's one other in there. Yeah. Sorry, do we have any other questions?
Since you're on the topic, I tried to send you a link for the post there.
Yeah.
It's not valid.
All right. Well, if you get me, I can. It was a big. If you look for Ansible Network Automation, it got a lot of press when we made that announcement. I know Peter and Todd Barr, our GM, were really busy in the press room after that. It's out there. It's also on our blog, I believe. Sorry about that. I grabbed that from an internal thing, and I don't know if I dropped a letter or something in that shortener. Yeah, anything else? All right, so I went into my strategic reserves for people asking good questions. Ansible? Where'd it go? Where'd it go?
I think
There
we
it
should
is.
save one for anybody that can remember all
Oh,
16 labels of precedence for variables.
Oh, yeah, there's a good
So
one.
if who can name off all 16 levels of precedence, you can get a
No,
little.
I got a trivia question. Why the bull? Does anyone know why the bull? Close, but no. I didn't know this too until I went. I didn't know this until I went down to our headquarters. There we go. Who just said that? There you go. Hey. Durham, North Carolina. Our headquarters is called the City of Bulls. Hence the baseball team, Bull Durham, or Durham Bulls, Bull Durham. Our office actually overlooks their baseball field. So if you get down to Durham and want to visit our office during baseball season, might catch a game. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, I have lots of stickers, and yeah, apply for a job.
Yeah. Thanks again, Tim. Thanks again. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you to our hosts. They're actually cleaning up after us right now, so they are really awesome. Feel free to stick around for a few minutes to chat or ask more questions. We don't necessarily have a timeline, but the party will probably end eventually, just FYI. So, cool. Thanks again, guys. Have a good night.
If you're interested in a job, stop and see me.